Brændgaard. Welcome to the Blockchain People podcast, powered by Uport, the decentralized objective research engine. At Uport, we specialize at creating institutional-grade research for capital institutions to find the true innovators and disruptors in decentralized ledger technologies. As you can see, we are doing this podcast to help educate the public and create an audience for the decision makers in the blockchain space. If you'd like to support this mission, all we will ever ask you to do is to hit the subscribe, follow, like, or whatever button you currently have in front of you. Pelle is currently the CEO of Notabene, and he's been in 20 years in crypto, ID, and fintech. He describes himself as an old school crypto nerd. He co-founded Uport and Kipochi, and he has also worked in Consensys, Doximity, and AltaVista, the Google of the past. So, how are you doing, Pelle?
Great, thanks a lot for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
I first heard about you because you were doing a panel with one of the past guests of this podcast. I hope you can guess who. But what really interested me about what you're currently doing is that I don't think anyone has ever tried to do a sort of a plug and play solution for compliance. And I think that's really important as we see more and more innovation and more development in the blockchain space. So yeah, what can you tell us about what you're currently working on?
Yeah, great. So compliance it's such a complicated thing. Like most people, particularly in the crypto blockchain space, they're like, why do they want us to do all of this? It's like, it's really annoying. We're decentralized. We don't need to do any of these kinds of things. So for a long time, people have been fighting against it. And when people have been doing it, there's very often been this attitude, all right, we'll just do the minimum necessary to do it. But things are changing right now. So there is there are many different things changing where we need to think about compliance in a different way. And one big thing is that FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the global, you can call them a global regulator. Officially, they are just a group that provides recommendations, but they really set the rules that all countries have to obey by. They have really sat down and tried to understand crypto and try to understand how do they fit crypto into the way that compliance is done today with banks. Like, what are the goals of how banks do perform anti-money laundering, those kinds of things today? How do you apply that to crypto? And I actually think they've done a really good job with it. But there aren't really any good tools that solves many of the requirements that they have. And that's where we set out. We come from crypto, we come from blockchain. We are not people coming from external trying to impose things. We believe strongly in the ideas and philosophy of crypto. My co-founder Andres and I, we both had early experiences with early exchanges, early Bitcoin. You know, we've been through the painful process of dealing with compliance and regulators, etc., ourselves. So we are looking at solving it in a way that solves issues for regulators, but also still fit within the mission and goals and philosophy of the industry itself. So to do that, we really need to create a plug and play kind of solution. Otherwise, it becomes hard for people to figure out how to do compliance if you have to plug all kinds of different solutions together and do it all on your own.
It's really, you hit the nail right on the head with that phrase, because people tend to feel that decentralized means no regulation. Decentralized just means it's on the internet and I do whatever I want with that. How do you help people that think like this reconcile these two ideas?
So, I mean, one way of looking at it is that the technologies themselves are not permissioned. Like Bitcoin is not permissioned. It's a decentralized technology. So is Ethereum, and that's not going to change anytime soon. No regulator can really go in and say, you know, block Bitcoin. I mean, they could try, but they would probably not be very successful at it. And I think they know. And I'm talking with a lot of regulators, they're not out to do that either, right? But one thing, even if you come from a very, very libertarian or anarcho-crypto kind of background, where, you have to also think about it, put it in the way that you as an individual cannot be forced to do something rather. And in a business, you can't be forced to transact with someone either. So you need to know some basics about who you're transacting with. You need to be able to make decisions. So it's like, like this permission, this way that we should be able to do things, unlimited transactions, all the exchanges, all the banks need to be able to manage our transactions. Ideally, we would like to be able to do transactions, any institution, but they have a right to say, no, I don't want to do business with you because I can't figure out how to manage the risk that you bring along with this. And that sounds like, in some respects, like it's incompatible. But it's not, we're not changing anything with the underlying technology. The underlying technology allows anyone to do whatever they want to do, individuals, all of these kinds of things. But businesses who are working with it, they do have some rules. They run risks. Like if they inadvertently do business with someone, it's like with the vice president of Nicaragua, for example, like a country I know very well personally. If they inadvertently do business with them, then that person who is on the sanctions list, that could be in the words of our lawyer, that can be an extinction level event for a business, right? So that you don't want to go in and put your business at risk. So you need to be able to manage risk. But managed risk isn't about stopping things. Managed risk, I see it's more about enabling things. So everyone always looks at compliance as a negative kind of thing. And if you look at the stories that blockchain companies have had with banks, for example, I can see that. I completely get that. I felt it myself. Like I've had bank services shut down and stuff like that. I get that it feels really bad, but using blockchain, using crypto, using some of the technologies that we're working on and some of the protocols people are doing, we're actually creating a way more inclusive way of dealing with this than what happens in the traditional banking industry. And I actually think this is why many of the regulators are actually not trying to ban crypto. They're not trying to ban Bitcoin because there are a lot of benefits having a public ledger that the governments can see,
right,
as well.
And you could also say that right
so
now,
yeah.
if someone tries to go outright and try to ban Bitcoin, they more or less look like the next Hitler, right? Like the eyes of everyone are gonna turn like, why are you trying to ban this now, and because of what, right? At this point in time, I think there is no stopping this kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But I also think we need to look at this also a little bit more than just about compliance. So it's about managing risk, but it's also about being able to do business, or for an individual to be able to perform a Bitcoin transaction, send money, send money to your uncle or your grandma using Bitcoin in a way that you can actually, that the money is going to get to your grandma when you send it to her. And if you send it just using the basic Bitcoin technology right now, just using an address, sending a transaction, it's been scary. I got into Bitcoin about 10 years ago. I'm still scared every single time I go to an exchange and I withdraw funds, or I send funds to an exchange from like my Ledger Nano or something like that. I'm scared. Oh, am I doing this right? Is there something, because all I have is this address, and that address could be faked. What happens in the JavaScript underneath? I know enough, so I'm like I'm scared every time I do it.
The more you know, the more scared you can get.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm also imagining someone who's used to like in Africa using M-Pesa, where you just send money to a phone number, and this is a phone number that right? Or PayPal, you send money to an email address. This is something that people understand. But sending money to this cryptic address that you can't even give to someone over the phone or anything like that is a scary kind of thing. And adding a privacy preserving kind of identity layer or counterparty layer, as we call it, on top of blockchain transaction actually starts making it a lot more useful for normal people as well, but for businesses even more so.
I remember, and well, quick point on the part of being scared about sending transactions. It is a bit weird. And the other day, someone in our office sent a transaction wrong, and the money got lost. And we were all like, "Man, you work in crypto," but that just shows you that the process is a bit hard. Like the process, you can very easily make a mistake along the way, and you get into trouble. And it's not like if you're sending a bank transaction where hopefully your mistake is one of those mistakes where it bounces back and nothing happens. Or here you're completely lost.
Yeah.
I remember back in the day when we used to go to crypto conferences and we had a QR code on the back of our business cards, and no one would ever know how to scan them. And we're like, man, you're supposed to be adopting crypto and you don't know how to scan a QR code. And now it looks like restaurants solve that problem by themselves. But I guess like
that's true. Good point.
Yeah, you must be having a lot of issues with small things like this that you have to work with every day. What other habits are you trying to build with people in order to be able to trust these payment systems?
So really what we're trying to do is the core of what we're building right now is a way of being able to identify the counterparties behind the transaction that you are part of. And when I say counterparty is like, it's basically the other side of a transaction. And when we're talking about a wallet to wallet transaction, it will just be who you're sending that to. But if you are sending funds to an exchange, the exchange is your counterparty here. And if you're from an exchange is sending fund to another exchange, then there are multiple parties involved in this particular transaction. And at all of these points, you really need to know who it is that you're actually interacting with. So this is actually the core of the travel rule, which is one of the more controversial parts of the new regulation that's coming out globally right now. But when I first heard about it, I was probably equally as skeptical as others. But I have also been trying to solve at Uport before, how do we map identities to blockchain addresses in a privacy preserving way? And the travel rule really requires you to solve this.
Can you please go into detail about the traveler rule?
Yeah, so the travel rule, essentially, it's not a new rule at all. It's a new rule for crypto, but it's not a new rule. It's been around for a long time. So when you send a SWIFT transaction from your bank, right, from, let's say, from Barclays in the UK to Citibank in the US, Barclays sends information to Citibank about you as a customer and to the receiving bank. And this is done through the SWIFT network today. And then the settlement in traditional payment happens very different than it does on blockchain. So settlement is just, it's completely, I always used to call it like the real dark net, like the way settlement takes place in traditional banking, because it's very, very difficult to follow funds directly through a settlement transaction, because it's not really directly related to the actual payment that you're doing. So there's this need for SWIFT to send information about who's the customer that's receiving this, who's the institution it's going to, who are you as an institution, and who is your customer. And then they perform various kind of compliance and risk analysis on it. It's not all compliance, but it's also general, like, is this a crook? Is there some kind of like other kind of risk involved with this particular kind of thing? And the travel rule is really about just sending that information along. But one big misunderstanding a lot of people have around the travel rule, that the travel rule isn't there because of the travel rule. It's not the reason that regulators want you to do this isn't because you should implement the travel rule. It's because you need, as a business, you need to be able to have a proper AML, like anti-money laundering and KYC kind of process. And if you're just sending, it may be that you're KYCing your customers like most exchanges do today, but the minute that they send the funds, you might as, I mean, you can easily be sending it to the Nicaraguan vice president, you know, without anyone knowing, and then all of a sudden you've basically, you know, you've broken your sanctions check duties, and you can have big fines or get shut down. So it's a risky kind of thing. So really, all of this is about the regulator saying you need these tools to be able to perform AML and sanctions check and all of these kinds of things. You don't have those tools today, so you need to implement the travel rule to do so. And that's what this is about. It's actually about giving businesses the tools to actually manage their risk specifically. And that's, I think that's the big thing that people are missing here. It's not really about you have to transfer this information. And yes, strictly speaking, it is, but it's about being able to solve another purpose. And there are many other purposes that you can solve with this. So for example, if you're like, if you just look in e-commerce, for example, if you integrate Stripe and they perform a payment, they get information about the customer. Your customer gets information about you as a merchant. All of this is through essentially a counterparty layer that is routed through the MasterCard and Visa network. Swift payments, all of these kinds of things go into, you know, supply chain, trade finance, you know, invoicing systems, all of these kinds of things. And you can't do any of these things without a counterparty layer on top of transactions. And this is, I actually believe this is one of these things that we've been very blind in the industry, and I'm completely guilty of this myself. But I remember like 5-6 years ago arguing like why, you know, people should be using Bitcoin for e-commerce, but how can you use Bitcoin for e-commerce if you can't actually map it to your customer? You can use it for a few small use cases, but if I'm trying to ship something, and what about if I don't receive whatever it is from, you know, crypto Amazon that I ordered? How can I actually get, you know, how can I prove to my payment processor? I mean, I can't because it's on a blockchain, but right. There are all of these things that are missing from a basic Bitcoin transaction or Ethereum transaction that you really need this layer to be able to do.
I mean, and in the case of, for example, because I'm sure you must have thought about this problem, how does your solution, for example, would operate in a world where sovereign identity on the blockchain is already a thing?
Yeah, so I mean, it will work quite well because it's not like sovereign identities. First of all, sovereign identities, they should be tied to a blockchain, but they should not live on a blockchain. That's because blockchains are not really good at managing privacy. So you need to. Blockchains are really the opposite of privacy. So really, right. What you need to do is have an identity that a user uses that can then be tied to a blockchain in a privacy preserving way. So I think it actually works quite well with this because self-sovereign identity actually solves many of these issues as well, particularly when you start tying it to blockchain transactions.
Correct. And I was going to ask you, but you kind of replied to it with the example of the vice president of Nicaragua. What would happen if one would break the traveler rule? But yeah, that's the case when this happens, right? Like you can, at the very least, get yourself a sanction, and in the worst case, be financing terrorism without knowing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so different countries have different rules. Like there are some regulators who are starting to institute new licensing schemes based on the recommendations from the FATF. So Singapore, for example, they have a new license called the PSA license, which is it's a very hard license to get, but Singapore is a really important jurisdiction. So a lot of our customers are applying for that right now. And one of the requirements for this is to have solved the travel rule. So you need to prove that you have solved the travel rule. The US regulator, they're taking a slightly different approach to it. So FinCEN is the US regulator, and they essentially say, well, they actually say that strictly speaking, all crypto exchanges should have been implementing the travel rules since 2013. But I mean, they haven't really enforced it yet. But the way that they look at it is more kind of like, I think, a more outcome-based approach where they're saying, these are the outcomes that we want to see. Like essentially, we want you to see blocking transactions to people on sanctions list, etc. And you need to be able to prove that you're doing this. And I don't know, I'm not enough of a lawyer to know what happens if you miss one or two, as long as you can prove you had the processes in place to be able to do it. But I think what my understanding is that they're very focused on you being able to, in an examination, show you have a process to go through this. So if there's a systemic kind of, case of money laundering or something like that, as we have seen, I mean, frankly, banks have run into this problem many times, right? We've seen many big banks, like Danske Bank in my home country of Denmark. They had a very, very extreme case with systemic money laundering through a subsidiary that wasn't caught through the processes in their parent country. In the parent company. So these are the kind of things where you start getting huge fines, and in some cases, like some really bad cases, jail as well in the US. Every country is different the way they do it, but the US is very focused on outcome, kind of the outcome from it. So it's not going to be an excuse that, oh, I don't know how to check who's behind this address. They don't care about excuses. They care that you're working on a solution. You are figuring out how to do this. And for them, the travel rule is one of those solutions. And another one that we're going to hear a lot more about over the coming year is wallet identification, where essentially you prove that a non-custodial wallet like in Ledger Nano or Trezor or MetaMask is owned by your customer. And so this is a new requirement. It's not really, strictly speaking, a travel rule around the travel rule, but FATF came out with some very vague recommendations around it in the same guidelines where they came out with, where they mentioned that you have to implement the travel rule, but it has to be really implemented hand in hand with the travel rule. Because if you're withdrawing funds from an exchange, you need to see, is this a travel rule? Like, is this a transaction going to another exchange, in which case the travel rule is required, or is it going to a customer's own wallet, in which case you now need to prove that this is actually your customer's wallet.
Does this apply to just a specific to companies in specific fields, or does it apply equally to everyone? Because I know that these kind of regulations are pretty much impossible to enforce once it's me sending $10 to my friend, right? But at what scale does this become an issue?
Yeah, so this is for regulated businesses. So if you are an exchange, and every country has kind of different rules around it. FATF, their overall guidelines say that they come up with the term VASP, or virtual asset service provider, but you'll hear the term VASP a lot. Of course, many other regulators, they come up with their own versions of it, CAS, crypto asset service provider. But it's basically, the real basic rule is, do you ever hold funds on behalf of a customer?
Right.
Like, do you hold keys on behalf of a customer? And so custodial wallets, institutional custodial services are covered. Any kind of exchange, it doesn't matter if it's crypto to fiat or crypto. In the past, it was only crypto fiat that was covered by this, but now now crypto also, and certain token issuance services. Now, one of the slightly different ways of looking at it is in the US, where there, of course, there are many different kinds of regulators. So FinCEN, who's primarily concerned with what they call money service businesses, they take a very technology agnostic view of it. And this is one of those areas where it could start affecting things like DeFi and DEXs. There are some people who think that it may start affecting even non-custodial wallet operators as well, because they take the approach that they are FinCEN takes the approach that they're technology agnostic. So if you are helping a user transmit funds, then you are a money transmitter. That's essentially their overall view. And if you're a money transmitter and it's an habitual kind of thing. So if you're just sending funds to a friend or helping a friend do something or other, that's not a problem. But if really your business is doing this, then you are a money service business and need a FinCEN license and have to obey these rules. And they've actually had cases where people on some of the Bitcoin exchanges, like the Bitcoin bulletin boards, like I forget the name of the most famous one right now. Well, people who are offering to sell Bitcoin on services have.
Right, local Bitcoins, you mean, right?
Local Bitcoins, exactly. Yeah. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, there have been cases where they have had sting operations against people on local Bitcoin, because they were, in their view, these are people who are obviously doing this as a business. Even if
it's very hard to claim that that's not your business when you have 400 transactions on local Bitcoins.
Exactly. So people may not like this, but also, I mean, FinCEN, I think they are, in general, they've had a pretty pro crypto stance. People may not like what they come up with, but I think they've really taken a lot of time to understand the technology. There's a lot of rumors happening about new things that are going to come out soon. We'll see what those are. But generally speaking, so far, I've been, mostly okay with a lot of the things that requirements that they have.
Just today, the rumor that came out, and this is just like a fresh one, I was reading it when I was waiting for this interview. The newest rumor is that Ethereum 2.0 is gonna cause the cryptocurrency to be considered a security, which would completely break the whole thing. Did you ever hear anything about that?
No, I haven't heard that. I mean, ETH2 is not the same as ETH. ETH2 is not Ethereum. So if
right,
I'm not sure. I haven't heard that rumor, but that would be an interesting thing. I mean, if you actually look at the way the community has been pushing it, I could understand why SEC would look at it. But I honestly, I haven't heard that. It'll be very interesting. I do think, generally speaking, as a community, we have to be a little bit better at talking about the reality about what we do, and I do think we've been bad at doing that in the past. Like we had the ICO bubble, right, where which was obviously crazy. Everything that was going on, there was obviously a lot of fraud going on, and there's a lot of things like that happening in the community, and we have to be better at using terms like decentralized correctly.
Right, and knowing when it is decentralized and when it is distributed, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
And you recently raised capital for your company, successfully so. Congrats.
Thank you.
It's very interesting because for me and for most people, I guess, plug and play and regulation are not two things that go together like ever. So is this a triumph of a bright idea that got executed correctly? Is this because the people that have trusted you to invest in you have decided that these are the kinds of solutions that we need? And is this also does this also speak that the rules are being designed in order to enable these kinds of solutions more and more? Or what can you tell us about this?
I mean, the industry needs a way of being able to start comply with these rules pretty quickly, and it's been a huge problem. Like, for example, when this travel rule came up, right, there are 5 or 6 public open source protocols with white papers showing how to implement the travel rule. But the people who actually have to implement it are the compliance teams. So to be able to actually start complying with this, you have to get the technical team together. They have to analyze all of these different protocols. And we've heard many stories with compliance officers who are really, really good at their job at dealing with the compliance, but they've been handed like technical white papers and pick one, right? And just that on its own is a difficult thing. Then you have to get the technical team involved. You have to build up compliance procedures. You have to figure out how to manage the risk. What does the travel rule even mean? How does it integrate in all of our existing tools? How does it integrate in our back end? How does it integrate in our front end? This is why it really is something that it's not a simple thing to solve. So we came into it with the approach that you need to solve this in a holistic way, and you can't do that by just going for creating a competing protocol or something like that. You really have to look at what do you actually need to be able to solve the travel rule. So, I mean, it's plug and play in a way that it's fairly easy to plug into to both your back and front end for a VASP. Compliance officers, we help them build rules to be able to manage their transactions. But there's still a lot of work. Every compliance officers, we can't just have a set of default rules and say, and compliance officers just trust that we did this correctly, because it's their legal liability that they check that everything is done correctly. So we also come from the approach that we are not setting default rules. We're not telling people how to do things. We're giving people the tools for them to figure out how to do this themselves, but not having to worry about the technical aspects of it is a really important part of it.
Mm-hmm. And for us, like most of people that don't work in compliance, how hard is actually the technical part? How much technical knowledge does it actually take to be able to comply, as opposed to just develop a project without any compliance?
Yeah, so there's if you were to build all of this yourself, right? So first of all, you would need to select one or more travel rule protocols, and there are multiple: TRP, OpenVASP, TRESA, US Travel Rule Working Group. There are several of these protocols. You have to pick one first and then maybe implement multiple. Then you have to set up nodes to connect to them. You have to build then you have to figure out how to integrate this into your backend. You have to set rules, and like the compliance team and the technical team have to work back and forth. How do we manage creating these rules? So what we do, and you also need a compliance dashboard. So yeah, which is another piece of tooling that you have to build internally in most cases. So what we do is that we take care of the majority of that. And the basic part of implementing it from a technical point of view is in your backend. When you are about to send a transaction, you just call an API on our servers with some information about this transaction, and then we take care of most of the rest. There's also there are some decisions to be made around a transaction. So to do a full implementation, you also shouldn't send the actual funds immediately, but that's not that big a problem because most exchanges already have some kind of risk management tooling in there. So we then communicate status back based on the risk that the risk measures that the compliance officer has set to the exchange's backend, and then you can just send it as normal.
And I mean, we were speaking about rumors before, and there's always something, right? We always have a bunch of those, and I guess as of now, they don't impact the regulation room that bad, right? Like, or at least you don't see anything particularly life changing coming from the regulators room soon, right? As opposed to other times, like let's say 2017, where we just saw that we might be facing the possibility of whole crypto going into nothing. Do you see any risks ever, any important risks coming from the regulatory room for the whole crypto environment ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean the thing about the regulatory risk for crypto as a whole right now is that crypto has proven itself, but it's at its very early days. And the fact that the regulators are interested in it right now actually shows that crypto is close to uh, as Silicon Valley types often say, it's close to crossing the chasm into mainstream usage. And for it to get there, the regulators are for sure going to be monitoring things. And we can't go ahead just acting, particularly when we're building businesses on top of this technology. We can't go on and act like we don't have to think about these kinds of things. But it's so yes, we have to look at what the regulators are doing, and many, to be honest, many exchanges are frustrated by the travel rule, and particularly this new rule with proving the ownership of wallets is a scary thing. These are things that seem scary for the industry, and I completely get it because it seems contrary to what we've been about as an industry. But when we actually start looking at the benefits that you get from it, I actually think this is going to be a boost for the industry. Now, there's some new technologies that everyone's been talking a lot about, particularly this year, such as DeFi, right, and Nexus and all of these kinds of things, and there's a lot of misunderstandings, both amongst regulators, amongst banks, but they're probably the place where there are most misunderstandings about this technology and regulators is amongst the DeFi community itself. And as an industry, I mean, the crypto industry, and I'll specifically talk about the DeFi industry right now, really needs to think closely about what they're doing right now. They need to, I think there's going to be a lot of space to continue innovating on this, but you can't just hide under this decentralized,
Everything.
everything, right? So and the regulators know this. I was at a call with a lot of regulators, and I heard the regulators say, how can a company that's based in Silicon Valley, that's got funds from like major investors, how can they claim that they can run an exchange and not be subject to the same rules as any other exchange, right? And there's been this myth of decentralization in the blockchain community, and in some respects, Ethereum, because Ethereum allows you to do way more complex things than Bitcoin. It's a bit easier to do this, but if you are creating something on top of Ethereum, and you can go in and make changes to it, if you talk about it on Twitter, if you have your ENS name tied to your Twitter account, if you go to conferences talking about it, if the VCs that invested in you talk about you, retweet what you're doing, all of these kinds of things. I mean, are you really decentralized? I don't, it's like, at one layer, you may be decentralized. Your business logic is running in a decentralized way. But are you actually decentralized? The industry needs to start asking themselves questions like that. And if they really want to focus on full decentralization, then there are some, very different, we need to think differently around this. But it's not, I don't think it's all doom and gloom, because I think there's solutions for a lot of these kinds of things. We're already working on a lot of solutions internally to be able to allow people in the DeFi space to continue to innovate in a permissionless way, yet still comply with many of these rules that are coming. And if we look at US regulators, for example, they've always said the same thing: we're technology agnostic, right? If you're offering securities, then you're offering securities. It doesn't matter the technology. If you're transmitting payments, then you are, a money transmitter. If you if you're issuing derivatives on a blockchain, it doesn't matter that it's on a blockchain. It's a CFTC would like to chat with you, right? And this is how we need to look at these kinds of things. So it's about managing risk. It's not about stopping innovation. But it's generally, a lot of this is more than anything is about making these tools also safer for end users, and being able to just, publish stuff without a security audit, post it to Twitter, and then, next week having lost, $15 million is, I mean, maybe, it's a learning, it's a learning, learning opportunity, right? But it's good that we learn from these kinds of things, but it's also about, let's also start getting some things into production, into real places where this technology can actually help. And I think DeFi has some amazing innovation going on. And if we get this into hands of actual real end users in a safe way, I think it's going to start changing the world.
There's a lot of that. There's a lot of we're decentralized, but we're not fully decentralized. But this part of our project is decentralized and the rest is not.
Yeah.
Then you get into that territory that you mentioned. And you've mentioned it twice, and I think it's very important to talk right now, of course, but as a community about that. What are we considering decentralized and what is it decentralized for? Because just doing something inefficiently just because it's decentralized is not the best way to go about things. And then some things like Bitcoin need to be decentralized in order to be what they are. But do you think the things that are fully decentralized and that should be decentralized should just be left alone by regulators, or how can we live in a world where things are decentralized? Because Bitcoin, I think, is the first thing that we see that is fully decentralized as itself, and for most of its lifetime, no one has known exactly what to do with it.
Yeah, but it's not that new a problem. I mean, this is another thing. Like, I've been working in the internet space for a long time. Like, I've been in the web since the very early days, and this may sound strange for most people in the blockchain space, but the internet is kind of like one of the original decentralized technologies. Before that, there was Usenet. There's a bunch. Actually, no, Usenet probably came after the internet, but there have been many different kinds of decentralized technologies in the past. All of them have their pros and cons, and all of them solve specific things. And people talked about the internet as well. How can we have this wild technology that can't be controlled? And people countries found ways of controlling it, and then people found, ways of getting around that control. So it's always been like a cat and mouse kind of game. Right. And Bitcoin and Ethereum are, they are decentralized, and at least the US regulators, they have, specifically said that this technology is fine, right? So they are not out to shut any of these kinds of things down. There may be other regulators who would like to shut things like this down, but most of the major regulators aren't, and they actually like this kind of technology.
One would argue that the other side of that, though, is that you've never had decentralized things that make money for people. And that is where the conspiracy theorist comes out and says that's why they don't want you to touch it.
But see, even that I would actually disagree with. I mean, first of all, we have cash, right? Cash is the ultimate decentralized payment method. Yes, there's a centralized issuer somewhere, but the payments are done peer-to-peer in person. They're completely decentralized. And the commerce that you're doing there is also completely decentralized. It's actually a lot more decentralized if you think about it. Like, for example, think about if we just forget about modern supermarket, all of these kinds of things, but just think about a traditional world with lots of markets, just markets where people go in and trade and exchange dollar bills or whatever for apples and oranges, etc., etc.
Okay.
These kinds of transactions happen all the time, and they're way more decentralized than Ethereum is. I mean, each transaction itself is on its own. It happens between two people,
Right.
but it's a very, very decentralized system. It's way more decentralized than a blockchain could ever be. So we've been enamored in a way that blockchains are this ultimate decentralized kind of goal. And I actually think it's probably better to have lots of different kinds of decentralized technologies. I mean, Bitcoin is, yes, it's decentralized in the modern way of looking at it. There's no one place you can go in and shut it down. It's a difficult thing to shut down anyway.
Maybe China.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I heard a podcast the other day where actually it seems like China isn't actually where most of the mining power is nowadays anyway. But things like this move along around. But if you look from a centralized point of view, I mean, yes, it's difficult to shut it down. So in that case, it's perfectly decentralized. But it's also perfectly centralized in that every single node has the exact same state. So if there are many different ways of viewing this, where in a traditional cash commerce system, there isn't a central source of truth, but there's tons and tons of sources of truth, which is like the wallet, all the wallets of all the people around. The actual source of truth is who actually has the dollar bill in their wallet. And so it's complicated. It's not an easy kind of thing, but Bitcoin, Ethereum is decentralized in one layer, but in some other it also brings a lot of benefits, but a lot of these benefits are also can also be problems.
And that's also in Bitcoin's white paper, right? And that's the first thing you see. It's a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? Bitcoin was originally supposed to be electronic cash, and then I don't think, and of course it's super hard to know what people were thinking, or what Satoshi, if it was just one person or whatever, was thinking. It was going to get to the place that it got right now, right? It's 20 years down the line, and you just don't know. And of course the authorities were gonna get in the middle somehow. And to start wrapping up the interview, and to finish the topic on decentralization and regulation, what would you personally be looking forward to see coming from regulation? Where do you think things should head towards, with your experience and being right there in the middle of things?
I think the regulation should be focused on and really helping give the industry the tools to be able to comply with existing regulation. It should be patient as well. And I mean, a lot of regulators are very patient, and like FinCEN in the US has actually shown a lot of patience. Some other regulators are less patient, but I think being open to look at how the industry solve the problems is a really important step. And the regulators, I mean, FATF, they have regular meetings with people from the industry that we and others attend, and they're very open to talking with us and hearing solutions about this. So for example, if they're worried about peer-to-peer transactions, there are people from our industry who can actually show numbers that they shouldn't really be worried about it, because the stats show that it's not actually a high risk thing to worry about. So as an, the regulators should I mean, for sure they have their mandate, they have things that they have to do, but they should also be patient with the industry, and they should listen to the industry about come up with ways of solving these issues. But I mean, that's also a double-edged sword. That also gives us as the industry the responsibility to work on solving these issues, because if we don't work on solving the issues, and frankly, as an industry, we haven't been solving these issues. And the current DeFi space is a classic example of this, where the industry is saying, we decentralize, we don't have to do any of this kind of thing. But I mean, there are people in DeFi that are working on solving these issues. So it's not the whole industry that's like that. But we also need to actually be open to work with the regulators. So the regulators should listen to us. But if we're not willing to talk with them and not willing to help solve some of their problems and help openly talk about it, I think it's going to end bad for all sides. And thankfully, thankfully, I'm not seeing a lot of that. At least that most of the traditional crypto industry has been very active talking with regulators. Companies like Chainalysis are. We are really, trying to help explain things to the regulators. But I mean, also, as I mentioned before, FinCEN, for example, FATF, they have very, very smart people there who have a good understanding of the technology as well.
Do you ever get the flip side, like having to explain things to not very smart, or not very interested, or not very engaged people in regulation?
Actually, no. I've never had that experience so far. Even way back in the day, like when I ran a startup, Kipochi, in Kenya, where we're doing Bitcoin mobile money, and I was called in to explain Bitcoin to the regulators, to the central bank, and it was a good open conversation where they were just trying to learn. They were not, what the hell are you doing? It was like it was actually a really good conversation, and I was grilled for sure, but 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 most regulators, they have the things that they're worried about. So in many cases, they're political things within a country that they have to worry about. For many countries, are worried about FATF, like the Financial Action Task Force, putting them on the black or gray list. So they're worrying about, we need to obey these recommendations because we're already in trouble because of the way our banks are doing things. And the gut reaction for some of these might be, we don't need to understand this. Let's just ban all of it, right? And that you could, and in some respects you can see it. They don't have time because they are like busy cleaning up their banks or something like that. They don't have time to deal with this new crypto thing. But the great thing, FATF is actually taking the time to research this and come up with a good framework that's relatively simple to implement. I'm not saying it's easy to implement, but it actually explains to the regulators what crypto is, what the blockchains are, what the risks are, and a proposed framework for solving it. But generally speaking, the regulators have been pretty open to it. Also, people from traditional banking, but traditional banking is also still a place where you do see some, maybe more people who don't quite understand it, but less and less as well. Most of the people that I'm talking to are, I thought I turned off notifications. Let me just, there, but
you received very few WhatsApps in this hour. I'm impressed. Mine would be just going and going and going. Okay, so I mean, yeah, dismissive is the word that I would always what I would describe what I imagine like being sitting in a regulating room. But in the end of the day, well, you're right. They're trying to keep things running, right? They're not trying to shut things down for
No.
shutting things down sake.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they are worried about, you know, people looking at their country being a, you know, being a money laundering center or something like that, you know, and that can affect many different things. It can affect your bond rating. It can affect your bank's access to international markets and to the SWIFT network. It can affect a whole bunch of things, and they're rightfully worried about these things. They're also worried about, I mean, you know, they're worried about terrorist financing. They're worried about, you know, the reputational risk of being part of, you know, hiding money for dictators, those kinds of things. And they, you know, they're right to be worried about this, because, you know, every time, I mean, just look at the Panama Papers. Whenever there's something like that comes up, it's a massive, you know, it's a big publicity problem for a country when something like that pops up. And not just a publicity problem, but it creates problems for the entire financial industry of a country when these kinds of things happen. So they have a right to be worried. And I actually think most of them are, in my experience, they've been decent people, worried people, and they're trying to understand the technology. And the ones who don't are just because they have so much on their plate right now. They just don't have time to deal with all of this crypto nonsense. I mean, to be, you know, quote unquote, because they've got bigger things to deal with right now, right? And I get that. But most of the large regulators, they have teams that are really studying crypto. They're understanding it. They're building up the frameworks, and they are completely open and happy to talk with people.
I mean, and if one happens to learn organically, if you've been in the crypto environment for 4 years, 5 years, 7 years, 20 years, if you've been for a long time here, you sort of feel like it should be easy to understand things, but try dealing with people that are just learning, and then you just see the sheer amount of information that you need to digest to do so. And then the noise that comes in every day that might not end up being relevant, but can be. So,
exactly.
Pelle, where can people learn more about Notabene and about everything you're doing?
Yeah, our website is notabene.id, notabene.id. And you can follow me on Twitter, Pelleb, Pelleb. And please reach out. We are working with crypto businesses from around the world. We're not only working in countries where with exchanges in countries where regulators are actively starting to enforce these things, but a lot of exchanges are reaching out to us, even in places where the regulators are busy with a bunch of other kind of things, because they want to be ready. Feel free to reach out to me personally, and either via Twitter or from on our website. And yeah, I'm very happy to talk with people in the industry, and also have a debate about these subject matters, because I know a lot of this is controversial in the crypto industry, and I'm very open to have a open debate around these kinds of things.
We're actually looking forward to hosting debates. So if you're already raising your hand, I can make you promise that you'll come back for a debate one time.
Sure.
Perfect.
I'd be
Well,
very happy.
thank you very much, Pelle. And thank you for taking the time. Thanks to everyone that's still listening to this. If you have any questions about Notabene, reach out to Pelle. If you want to learn more, go to their websites. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. And well, we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.